Well, we have a treat today. Hi, everybody. Thomas Miller on the Fun Astrology Podcast. This is being released on Tuesday, May 7th. We have a new moon today, and I'm going to release this on the new moon. 11:21 p.m. on Tuesday, May 7th. We are releasing an interview with Stephen Forrest about the Book of the Moon, which is now on audio. Available on Audible and on iTunes, and you don't have to have a subscription, that Audible stuff. No, you don't. Just go to Amazon, buy it from there, and you can buy it as a one-off. You don't have to have a subscription, and your library will not disappear. How do I know? Because that's how I do it. Steve was generous to give us some time to talk about the structure, the chapters, and some of the points in the Book of the Moon, which is a classic Steve Forrest book. It should be on everybody's bookshelf and in their audio library collection, because then you can listen to it and just let it absorb in. It really is that good. And you're going to hear how Steve uses the moon in his daily life. So without further ado, well, Steve, first of all, welcome back to the podcast.
I'm delighted to be here again.
And we're neighbors now, almost, kind of, sort of.
One mountain between us, and that's all.
One big peak, and Palm Springs right there, too.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, listen, thank you, first of all, for letting me bring this to audio and to get the Book of the Moon out there. I know we've had a lot of people in my podcast world excited about this book.
Great. It's one of my favorites. The moon is so central to astrology, and it tends to get short shrift. Everybody references it, but there's so much depth and complexity to the moon that simply gets lost.
Okay, now that breeds a question. So did you have the body of knowledge before you wrote the book, and the book was basically getting that body of knowledge out, or did your body of knowledge increase as you were writing the book?
Your moon is working overtime here, Thomas. That's a very intuitively astute question. The Book of the Moon is, I guess I should interrupt myself and say, I've never written a book without learning something in the process of writing. But with every other book I've written, the body of knowledge was fundamentally there and intact, and I just needed to write it down. With the Book of the Moon, there was a tremendous learning curve. You know, the more I wrote, the more questions formed in my mind and a little more research. And before I knew it, I was a snowball rolling down the side of a mountain, but it was the side of a mountain I didn't know was there in the first place.
I love that. I can only imagine. How long did it take? Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly. My books typically take me 12 to 18 months to write. I think that would be a pretty accurate estimate.
Okay. All right. Now, speaking of, in the early part of the book, you set up some, I just called it moon features, for lack of a better word, cool tidbits and knowledge that I guarantee most of everybody listening, there is something in there you don't know about the moon, either astronomically or astrologically. And it's not just a bunch of astrological stuff. You tell us about the moon and its orbit. And is there one of those little tidbits that's most interesting to you?
You promised me no trick questions. This one is along the lines of, which child is your favorite? You know? But I guess to give you some kind of honest response, the lunar declination was eye-poppingly important. I felt that I'd been aware of it in a dim sort of, back burner way. But when I started actually looking at the declination of the moon, it was like realizing there was another continent on the earth that I had not been aware of. It felt that important. Some of your listeners probably don't know what I'm talking about with declination. It's a pretty simple idea. If we take Earth's equator and just project it out onto space, as if you could see it like a line in the sky, the moon and really all the planets are most of the time above it or below it, like New York City is north of Miami. It's just like latitude on the Earth. It's called declination in space, and the moon can move pretty substantially north or south of that celestial equator, and once it gets above 23 degrees, 26 minutes of arc, which sounds ridiculously precise, but that's as far north or south of the celestial equator as the sun can get. And it defines the first day of summer or the first day of winter, north or south. The moon gets a little further. It's called out of bounds. And when it gets there, it's wild.
So there's one of those areas that might have opened up as you were getting more and more into it.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
A cousin question then to that is I'd love to know, and I've experienced a little bit of it just working with you around the edges, but how do you use the moon applied in your daily life? Or I say daily, I mean, however whatever construct.
Well, one very practical feature in terms of my daily life, many people have heard of a phenomenon called the void of course moon. It's a situation that arises every couple of days, basically, and I can explain it technically if we need to, but very simply, it's a little window of time in which anything you start is likely not to turn out the way you expect it to or intend it to. You can use that positively. Like one interpretation of it is nothing will come of this, and so you don't want to get married under a void of course moon, because you would like a long, happy life to come of it.
I probably didn't know that back in the day.
Yeah, probably I didn't either. But just to complete the thought, filing your taxes, when you drop that envelope in the mailbox, you hope, okay, that's the end of it. I've washed my hands of this. I would like nothing more to happen as a result of filing my taxes. And so it's not accurate to call the void of course a negative time, but it's something to be aware of. And in terms of my daily relationship with the moon, before I do anything important, really literally anything that's important in my life, I check the condition of the moon.
How long have you been doing that?
30 years.
Wow.
Something like that, yeah.
So you distinctly see a pattern, a correlation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay, everybody's out scrambling now for their phone and getting out their
yeah, check it out. So
chart program of choice.
What of course, technically, it's like, I want to have mercy on your listeners who are beginners here. So, but basically, the idea is that the moon is in a certain sign, and as it sweeps through that sign, it forms aspects, certain critical angles, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 120 degrees to the other planets. But at some point, when the moon is passing through a sign, it gets later in the sign, and it's not going to form any more aspects before it exits that sign. It's like done everything it's going to do while it's in that sign. And that's the void of course period. And it can be minutes long, or it can be many, many hours long. It varies enormously. But that's the technical definition of it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's we've been having a lot of fun with, and there is a whole chapter on the void of course moon, and a technique that you illustrate in there about that last aspect before it changes signs. And we've talked about that on our podcast, and we've been playing with that a lot. And I've pointed everybody back to the book for the full explanation of that. And we'll just leave it there for this. It's chapter 4 of the book, and it is great. And it is obviously something that is very practical. Now, also in that chapter, or related to the void of course, and one of the seasonings, I guess, that you explained around the void of course is that for things to happen in our lives, the way we believe, right, the way we approach life, that the moon combines with other planets in order to make that happen. So you just described that void where there is no relationship with other planets. So do you have a story that, and I know this is like, have to go back in the annals in the vault of your mind, but do you have any good stories of where you intentionally combined Luna with another planet, specifically around some kind of created manifestation, and had that fulfill?
I can almost answer that, just one little tweak. This is a fun story, but it didn't involve a planet. I should back up a little bit and say that a question that just kind of breaks my heart when I hear it. Somebody says, I'm getting married on Saturday. Is that a good time to get married? In other words, they're not going to call off the wedding. Now, because of void of course and certain other things, most of the time, or the majority of the time, the astrological indicators run kind of towards red lights more than green lights, not to be totally pessimistic, but the really green light, positive astrological times, the odds are against that. It's off the top of my head, maybe a third of the time, things are looking good. So at random, probably it's going to be thumbs down rather than thumbs up. So that's actually a necessary preface to the responding to your question. For years and years, I was very much involved with the music business, with my friends who were suits, with major recording labels. And a guy hit me with one of those miserable things. His career was hanging on promoting a new artist. If this new artist was successful, then everything was going to go well for his career. But, he had 2 strikes. He couldn't have a third strike, basically. And so a good friend of mine, and I need to submit this thing today. Is it a good time astrologically? And it was like, oh my God, I checked it out and it didn't look good. But I knew there was one weird little bit of astrological lore. I had never put this to practice. There's a mathematical point called the part of fortune. I'll spare you the details of how to calculate it, but in the tradition, if you can have the last aspect the moon makes be an easy one to the part of fortune, there was a tradition saying this could save your behind. And so I realized there was like an 11-minute window on that day in which we could take advantage of the geometry of the moon relative to this part of fortune. So this guy, I have to be a little careful of confidentiality here. This guy, a suit in one of the major labels, he has the package that he needs to drop in the mail. He goes down to the mail room. And, he's like a major force in the company. The guy in the mailroom is, kind of sweating bullets. Why? He's just, my client is kind of standing around looking at his watch. I said, sir, what can I do for you? Oh, nothing. I'm just standing around. It's a nice day we're having, isn't it? Do you enjoy working for the company? Looking at his watch every couple of minutes until the moment. And then he hands the package over to the guy. And of course, the punchline, which is absolute true, that guy, that year, that artist got, country western new artist of the year, or major award of that nature. It worked. In other words, the guy's career took off. Two careers took off, all because of the part of fortune.
And you had a client for life. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's still a good friend.
Oh, my goodness. What a great story. That's amazing. But it also illustrates how practical this is.
Yes, it works.
As I'm holding up the book, and why everybody needs one of these. See, to me, some of these things, especially with astrology, there's the desk reference. I'm holding the book up. And the audio gives you the ability to listen in your car and let it really sink in.
Yes, absolutely.
And
it takes a while to learn it.
Yeah, it does. It does for it to all process.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to look at one chart or one graphic or one visual to get this. It's all spelled out in language. So the audio adaptation is perfect.
Yes, it is.
Okay, now the bulk of the book, half of it or more, is about the phases of the moon.
Yes, yeah. That's
And
really what I set out to write about.
what would you do to give us just a quick overview of the phases of the moon?
Oh, yes. It's a pretty simple idea that a good way to think about it is to our intuitive sense of the aging process. The just human beings getting older. We understand, and obviously, not all young people are the same, and not all old people are the same. But there are certain generalizations that we might make about being young. That there's often more energy, enthusiasm. Life mostly lies ahead. So there are certain hopes and fears, of course, that go with the pages having not been written yet in life. So often there's an enthusiasm, a sexiness, a naivete, headstrong idiocy. We've all been young, and there are good things and bad things about it. And then as we move on in life, we get older, and hopefully there's wisdom, experience, a more nuanced view of things, and the wisdom of old age, which sometimes we observe. I would also recognize the danger of people kind of giving up, losing hope, quiet desperation. All of that is as a shadow side of getting older. Now, all this is familiar to all humans, especially older ones, who've been through much of the cycle. The reason I say it is that the cycle of the lunar phases is built along almost exactly the same lines, that the waxing moon, from the new moon to the full moon, has the resonance of youth to it. And the waning, full moon back down into the dark has the resonance of being older. And so you find, for example, two characters out of central casting, and we've all met them. One, the old person who's full of life, kind of naughty, makes mistakes, laughs at the mistakes, and is just vital and alive, even though they're 80 years old. Look at their chart, waxing moon. They're not young, but they have that emotional signature of youth. And then the other side of the coin, the smart, quiet kid in your class, like in the 6th grade, and just sort of a dramatic image, but somebody, a classmate, discovers their father has cancer, let's say, or their mother has cancer, and they immediately seek out that one child to talk to. Even though the kid is in the 4th grade, there's something of the wise old man or the wise old woman already in that child. And we find that waning moon energy, even though the person is young. So that's just a broad way of thinking about the phases of the moon. It becomes more nuanced as we look at each of the individual 8 phases, but that's the fundamental logic that underlies it.
And I love the way you set this up by saying that whenever we meet in astrological circles, we ask, oh, what's your sun sign? And from that, we get a construct. And what's your moon? Where's your moon? And we get a construct. But nobody asks.
Exactly. What's your phase?
So once you read through or listen through all of these sections and these phases, you will know what your moon phase is just by where it is natally in your chart. And
Yes.
then Steve gives you not only the explanation of that phase, but then integrates it in the next section, section 4 of sign, house, etc., the full integration of that. So you get the whole picture. I guess pretty much if you put A and B and C together from here, that would be about the same as experiencing a reading with you if that were the focus of the topic.
Yeah, you certainly get the essence of it. One of the most interesting things about the moon in comparison to the other astrological features, if we're thinking about your Mercury, for example, I want to know what house it's in, what sign it's in, and what aspects it makes. And if I have that information, I can say a lot about your mental and communicative style, which is what Mercury is. That's basically the information from those three sources: sign, house, and aspect. With the moon, we absolutely use those three. And then on top of that, we add the phase of the moon, the moon's declination, the speed at which the moon is moving. That's another factor we haven't even talked about yet. In other words, the astrological context in which we find a person's moon is much more nuanced than the context in which we interpret any of the other planets. There's simply more dimensions to it. There's more to know, and that's unique about the moon.
The way that you expressed it in the book is so perfect because all of those areas are covered. So all somebody has to do is just think a little through their moon placement, and then they can get all those other pieces of data, the declination, the speed, etc., and then they just put it together for themselves. So it really is almost kind of the little bit teach me how to fish, but also there's a fish dinner at the end of the line too.
Yeah, exactly. Now, to be totally realistic there, astrology, learning astrology, becoming competent with the language, it's a bit of a task. It's far from impossible, and I don't want to overdo the difficulty, but a fair analogy would be like going to law school or going to medical school. 3 or 4 years, and hard work. We can encompass it, but it's not something we learn in a weekend workshop or a 45-minute YouTube video. And so I'm saying this because as you're saying, somebody can read the Book of the Moon and they can put a lot of this together. They can have considerable understanding just from reading that book. But there's much to be said for sitting with a competent, experienced astrologer. It's like, do you want a medical diagnosis from your friend who's seen the 45-minute YouTube video, or do you want to go to the doctor?
Yeah, exactly. One of the other pieces of this book that just really got me was the ending chapter. All right. Now, I don't want to turn this to myself, but I'd always thought, I don't have a moon. I got cheated a moon. And it is within the range of under the beams. I was born about a day before a new moon. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of those Gandalfs that you were talking about. And in the very end, the conclusion, and I've told people on the podcast this, I've said, this will not spoil anything if you listen to the conclusion before you listen to the section on the 8 phases. Mm-hmm. Because what it does is you so well eloquated that moon position is the very essence of our soul's development during this lifetime.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's what we take with us out of this world. If we really get right to the metaphysical heart of it, a closely related subject here, a symbol in the chart called the south node of the moon, brings us right into the metaphysical heart of astrology. It's our unresolved karma. We use the language of prior lives to understand the south node. The reason I'm referring to it is that it's like what reincarnates, what survives the trauma of death, passage through the bardo, and rebirth is the emotional body. The simple truth of it, we're sitting around with people who accept reincarnation, and I say, well, what was your name in your previous lifetime? Often they don't know. What city did you live in? Often they don't know. Even people who believe in reincarnation will often just have impressions and weird synchronicities, kind of loose ends when it comes to the kind of intellectual, cognitive remembering of a prior life. We're just weak there. But there is a level at which we remember our past lives perfectly, and that is the emotional level. The memories of the heart are robust enough to survive the trauma of death and rebirth. And so the kid who's waking up the family every night with screaming nightmares at 3 o'clock in the morning maybe died at a firefight in Fallujah, Iraq, a few years ago. And he doesn't remember that, but he remembers the fear. And so there's a monster under the bed, or, whatever his ideation is, the emotions are what survive. And so the idea that through our experiences, our subjective experiences of love and fear and all the variations in between, what we are doing is setting the stage for our next incarnation. This is the part of us that makes it through those mysteries and comes out the other side. That's how important the moon is. That's how spiritual the moon is. It's if you'll allow me one more paragraph here. It's interesting that a lot of this that I'm saying about the moon, the kind of mystical, transcendent sense of the moon, existed in traditional astrology. And then the so-called Enlightenment came along, and everybody gets very scientific and rational, and the moon gets contracted down to our emotions, just simply emotions. That's kind of the standard thing modern astrologers will say. The moon is your feelings. Well, yes, but it's so much more than that. And then what happened, of course, our spirituality didn't go away. Middle of the 19th century, we discovered Neptune, mystical spiritual planet, and a lot that we used to associate with moon, we gave it to Neptune. We left the moon standing around half naked, and now I think we're starting to see a kind of return, a renaissance of our understanding of human spirituality, and with that a deepening of our appreciation of the dimensions of the moon that have been forgotten for 200 or 300 years.
And that's the beauty of where all of this ties up. Could I read a couple of sentences from the last couple of paragraphs on that very theme? You say, built into the message of the moon in your natal chart are instructions for making sure that the memories you are building today are nourishing ones. That doesn't mean anything as simple-minded as being happy and positive all the time, and it certainly does not suggest any attempt to edit unpleasant experiences. Instead, it simply means that there are specific attitudes that genuinely feed and support you in the long run, and they are not necessarily the same attitudes that would be good for me, your Uncle Joe, or the person you share a bed with. There is a mood you are trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And that's encased in those phases.
Exactly.
Whatever your lunar configuration, if you get it right, you are laying down the capricious bricks of memory with the right mortar. You experience immediate benefit. You feel happy, for starters. You feel a comfortable sense of well-being. In the longer run, you are setting the inner tone for your later years, regardless of whether or not your physical brain thrives. As you age, you, like Carl Jung, which you talk about extensively, might find that your literal memories grow vague, but the moods and attitudes that you have created in your heart will remain. That moon memory will shine out through your roomy geriatric eyes, even as your brain fails. It will define much of the mysterious experience you face after your heart stops. And when, after a moment of rest upon the wind, you have 2 clear eyes and a child's impressionable heart again, it will shine on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
I immediately, a reaction that I feel compelled to make is the passages you read. I was kind of jamming on Carl Jung and Winston Churchill, if memory serves, who had Alzheimer's, near the end of his life. Carl Jung was approached about his biography. Agnella Jaffe wanted to do it, and at first Jung was dismissive of the idea. Hilariously, he said, "I forget my life." And I don't think he had dementia, but the details of his life, he wasn't attached to them, and he didn't think he would be able to be of much help. It turns out, she got a wonderful book out of it, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. But I guess the reason I'm feeling compelled to say this is that in the passages you read there, I was specifically looking at this, something that terrifies people, which is dementia or Alzheimer's. Most old folks, it's like, if you get to pick your disease, that's the last one they want. Give me cancer, give me a heart attack, but don't take my mind away from me. And a point that I was really hammering in that chapter is that don't confuse the brain and consciousness. That's the great error of our civilization right now, the conflation of the physical brain with the soul or the consciousness. And that if the physical brain becomes dysfunctional, and we're diagnosed with one of those diseases, the essence of us is still there. It's just that the communication device with what we call reality, the three-dimensional world, has broken down. The great soul of Winston Churchill, wasn't diminished by Alzheimer's. It just looked like it was diminished, but it was only the interface between his consciousness and this world that had broken down. And this is pure moon talk. This is spiritual talk, and taking care of the moon is the secret of happiness. And I wish your audience could see your face now. You're smiling. You like hearing this. I like saying it. When we tune into the moon, feelings of well-being, feelings of joy arise in us. It's pure magic.
What you said in those last few words, I got to say, and I'm a little choky right now, but I had to re-narrate that about 4 or 5 times, and then I thought, no, I'm going with the emotion. And I ran it by you before we released it, and you said it was okay, because it really did deeply touch me. And it might be because I am in that waning crescent, that I'm in that last part, that's been permeating my consciousness since, I always knew that I've got the sun and Neptune on the same degree, and then that moon right back there, just a few degrees away. And I've always felt that way.
Yeah.
But what that gives us is, it gives us that purpose that, as you were saying, in one way, from one perspective, you never can take away if you build it right during this lifetime.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. It's eternal.
It's eternal. And you'll take it with you, no matter what condition your body is in when you leave. When you regroup and you dust off and you go, oh, okay, that will be there.
Exactly.
Wow.
Wow, indeed.
You can get the book at Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. And why are you waiting?
ForrestAstrology.com. You can
ForrestAstrology.com as well. Absolutely. No, very well done and beautifully said.
Thank you.
It really brings the purpose of life right here.
Thanks.
And you know what's cool?
Yeah.
Except for a few nights, we get to look at it every night in the sky.
Everybody's fascinated by it. Just visually, just to look at it. You can take somebody who has no faith at all in astrology. It never crossed their mind that it might be real. There are plenty of good people, of course, who've just been conditioned not to believe in it, or not even to think about it. And yet all of them, who isn't moved by a moonlit night? It's just as simple as that. That's the primal perception of upon which astrology rests. At least we could make a case for that. I just imagine we're out in the countryside somewhere on the night of the full moon, just gazing out across a moonlit landscape. It looks like a dream. It looks like a another world. Like it's a doorway into a transcendent perspective. We begin to, in a sense, see through this world, to recognize there's something more beyond this world. And of course, talking like that, in some circles, I would sound like a madman. I would sound crazy talking like that. But it's the way the mystics have been talking since the beginning of time, that this world is an illusion, or this the three-dimensional world is embedded in a more multi-dimensional universe. There are lots of ways to say it, but it is the ancient truth. And intellectually, it's almost impossible for humans to wrap their heads around that. But our heart gets it, which is to say, the moon gets it. The moon is the part of us that perceives everything, that slips through the nets of rational or quantitative analysis. The moon is what tunes into the idea that life is meaningful. We can't prove that life is meaningful. The moon just knows. When we think about what gives meaning to life, almost anyone, if we ask them that question, reflexively, they'll say love. They'll say, love is what gives meaning to life. Well, other things can too, but love is certainly part of it. And in explaining the moon, I often like to imagine a person is like in a dentist office reading an article in a magazine that carefully explains to you why, even though you believe your cat loves you, in fact, your cat does not love you. Your cat is a little carnivore that would kill you and eat you if it possibly could. And a moon person reading that will recognize that there may be facts in the article, but it's not true. It's like, I know my cat loves me. I just know it. Well, how do you know that? Oh, I just know. And, scientifically, I just know isn't good enough. It's not a good answer. But from the moon's point of view, yes, it's a fine answer. There are things that we do just know because we have this perceptual faculty called the moon that tunes into everything, that slips through the nets of rational or quantitative analysis. I go right back to that. It's impossible to be happy without the moon. We need the moon. It's impossible to have a sense of meaning in life without the moon. That's how central it is.
We'll never stare up into the sky again and feel like we used to. It brings new meaning to
Exactly.
to that big, beautiful ball in the sky.
Exactly.
And, if you get really good at this, then you'll be able to walk out there and you'll look up and you'll say, I think that moon must be in Pisces. The last quarter. And Steve tells you how you can do that, but you really have to think about it.
Yeah, it takes a little thought. You have to understand the order of the signs in the zodiac. It makes it seem like you have this mystical power. I feel that the moon is in Pisces now, but the reality is Virgo is opposite Pisces. Just, for everybody, that's just how the zodiac is built. So if we're in the Virgo month, let's say it's September 5th, and there's a full moon means the moon is opposite the sun. And so if it's September 5th, we're in Virgo, and there's that full moon, it's in Pisces. It's got to be in the opposite sign to be full. And so once we understand the geometry, you can, if you know the date, you look at the moon's phase, and you can say what sign it's in.
That's just so cool.
Yeah,
so I ask again, why have you not ordered the book yet? Steve, thanks for coming back and telling us about this more.
It's been a delight, Thomas. Thanks for having me.
It's great to hear these explanations in your words.
Thanks.
I always love it when I get to talk to Steve. He's just such a delight, and what an amazing book. I think it's, over 14 hours, something thereabouts. But anyway, it is chock full of astrological information that we all need to listen to and absorb into our consciousness so that eventually it just rolls off of our tongue and we can use it like you heard him talking about here. Thanks so much for listening. I do hope you'll pick it up. It supports the podcast, and it's going to support you more. That's a fair trade. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.